Bum ba ba bum bum ba 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 bum bum ba bum 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 ba ba. We've done it. We're here. We're streaming away. Oh, I'm having one of those days where I like woke up tired with like a headache. Just like that's my life. What can you do? What can you do, you know? Yesterday it was huge snow came out of nowhere, right? So the whole place, we've gone back into magical winter wonderland here in Toronto. Not as bad as the first time, but still pretty bad. We're still pretty buried. So everything's kind of ground to a halt. But what can you do, right? You live with it. You do as you do. Today is Friday, so I'm going to take it nice and casually today. Nice and casually today. No pressure or anything. I mean, the news, and we'll be talking about it, the news is that the convoys are being cleared out, right? As we knew, that were going to happen. Pat King has been arrested, so has Tamara Litch. They've already got court dates set up, all that kind of stuff. So, it's going to be an interesting time. Chuds and their anime avatars. Are you talking about this? The image I've got up here? I don't really know what a chud is. Like, what's a chud? Is a chud like an online internet person who is like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's all learn something together. Definition of the word chud. Here we go. Probably not right. Chud is a term historically applied in the early East Slavic annals to several Baltic Finns in the area of what is now Estonia. Well, look at these, using some high-minded kind of stuff here. Well, I didn't realize that the Baltic Finns in the area of Estonia were so culturally important. Here's Urban Dictionary, which is probably where it's going to be more accurate. Hey Rusty, how you doing? Oddity Brandwin, good to see you guys. A male Karen, okay. So it's like but isn't that a Chad? Isn't that a Chad? An unattractive person whose defining characteristic of their personality is their egotism. Most often used to describe typically one-dimensional preps, chotches, or the like. A particularly mean insult, it should not be thrown around lightly. Well, look at these. A defecation. A big poop. Wow, a cannibalistic humanoid, underdwelling demon. Anyone who has no good qualities at all. Alright, I'm getting the feeling. I still think that we should use the original definition. Yeah, we're talking about Baltic Finns in the area of Estonia. Those chuds. They're getting to be. Hey Eric, how you doing, bud? That's what I love about language, man. Like, can you imagine living like as a Finn in this area of Estonia? And likely you refer to yourself as a chud, right? Like you're like everybody around you is a chud, and that's just who you are. And then you go to America, and like it's this other like a whole other insult. You're just like, well, wait a minute. I wonder if that's the actual like etymology of it. I wonder if we could edit. Yeah, this is what we do around here on Friday. We waste our time. Come on, where's the... Oh, wow, they're not giving me the website I'm using. Etymology. Yeah, this is an etymology dictionary. If you don't know what etymology is, it is the study of the history of words. Chad. No, Chud, right? There's no history of it, right? Ooh, a birthday party tomorrow. Is it your birthday, Eric? Are you having a birthday? You celebrate a birthday? That's exciting. How old are you turning, bud? Don't answer that if you don't care to. All right, guys, let's get into the number draw here. Let's do it. I'm going with my 10, as I do.
Here we go for today's number.
It's
number. February 18, 2022. 10 balls. Each ball has a number.
Mark, good to see you, bud.
Numbers 1 through 10.
We got an 8, we got a 10, we got a 7. Just watch.
Swirl the numbers.
It's going to be a 9 now. Oh, we got doubling down of 5s, though. Doubling down is good. He usually draws when there's a double.
Pick a number.
Here we go.
Today's number is 1.
Every time I pick 10, it goes 1, right? Like, not every time, but like... Pissed Off comes in late with a 2. Just missed it. Just squeaks under. Did you see the Gravel Institute video about their take on Ukraine? And turning 32. The Gravel Institute did a video about you turning 32? Wow. I didn't see the Gravel Institute video. Although the Gravel Institute's really good. Like, I'm yet to see them miss. Right? Like, I'm yet to see the Gravel Institute even miss just on, like any terms. Like, they're very well researched. They're always using the top experts. Their ideology seems to be what is the truth. And so if the Gravel is whatever the Gravel Institute is saying about it, they're probably accurate. My actual birthday's on the 21st. Trying to get my friends over. Yeah, of course. Of course. You get to a certain age and you're just like, I'm to the point now where if anybody even says like, oh hey, happy birthday, like those are the best people in my life. And like my birthday is January 6th, so like by the time my birthday comes around, we've all gone through like Christmas and New Year's and like all of the ridiculousness therein. And so by the time you get to my birthday, everybody's just like, My entire life has always been like, happy birthday, John, welcome back to school. Well, I think one of the most interesting pieces of news that have actually come out, Conservatives are up 10 points under Bergen. That's a mainstream poll, so our Main Street poll. So you got to be a little, like a touch, skeptical of it. Main Street polls are notoriously right-leaning, right? Like, and I feel like I've seen enough. I've seen enough information or seen enough polls come out of Main Street to be like, yeah, these guys typically do lean to the right. Like their electoral polling is like anytime the Conservatives are polling well, that the outliers are always the Main Street polls, that kind of thing. But the federal Conservative Party has shot up in the polls since Candice Bergen took over as interim leader and moved the party back to the right, according to new data from mainstream research. Bergen took over earlier this month after the Tory caucus voted to remove Aaron O'Toole, who failed to form government in the federal election last September, after advocating for progressive policies that Conservatives traditionally don't favor. Oh, my mic is turning the wrong way here. That's probably... When asked by mainstream who they'd vote for if a federal election were held today, 39% of leaning and decided voters chose the Conservatives, while 31% chose the Liberals. I don't get it. Like, I don't get it. Like, why do Canadians, like, what's going on here? Like, what's going on? Like, Canadians are upset and they don't, like, everybody's saying, like, we want climate change to be taken care of. Hey, let's pay attention to our healthcare system. Like, the Conservatives are against all of those things. Like, the support that is happening, like, we have a real, like, default way of thinking here in Canada. Like, we really do. Like, if it's not liberal, it's got to be conservative. Today is a dark day for Canadian democracy. I saw the RCMP run over an elderly woman on her cane, like with their vehicle. Our country is falling apart faster than any other. Canada is a tragedy. Well, and your Vince, what you are saying is actually being shared. Majority have lost faith in Canada's ability to keep peace and order in wake of trucker protests. What's the poll? The Maru Public Opinion Poll, done from the 15th to the 16th, found that 71% of Canadians would vote for a strong-willed person who will enforce law and order, regardless of what political party they are from. Like, it is completely possible that we are swinging into a conservative party. Like, Canadians have done it before. We're fairly gullible and easily scared. Yeah, I wish we had a socialist option, and that's why we're in the pickle we are today, because the socialists have been chased out of the conversation, right? You're not allowed to be a socialist in the conversation. Don't worry, on my birthday, an earthquake and a tsunami hit a city in Japan, killing 19,700 people and triggering a nuclear disaster, was cost $360 billion. Wow, dude, mocked. Way to ring in your birthday, bud. Now that's what I call a celebration. Holy cow. The lady was run over with a horse. Oh, just as bad. Like, just as bad if you ask me. Like, that's brutal. Ugh. I'm seeing friends, people who I know are celebrating the usage of this Emergency Measures Act, right? That, like, the arrest of Tamara Litch and Pat King and all these guys is being seen as like this really great success. But then simultaneously, like, the country is swinging towards conservatism, right? Like, it's very strange to me that, like, everybody... I was thinking about this just the other day, right? Like, we are defining these protesters and the people on the right by white supremacy. But in the grand scheme of things, that's actually fairly low on the list of things that we should be defining each other by, right? That certainly we are humans first, and then citizens, right? And then a group of us are white supremacists. And what I fear that we are doing is that we are selling out our citizenry in order to score a victory against white supremacy. And we seem to not have the analysis that there's an overarching body, the corporate state, that is more than happy to be granted large-scale powers. Hey, Base, how you doing? I mean, this is one from the World Socialist website, right? Canada's ruling elite applauds Trudeau's use of emergency powers against far-right Freedom Convoy. The federal Liberal government's invocation of the never-before-used Emergencies Act to end the far-right siege of Parliament and downtown Ottawa and the blockading of Canada-US border crossings has been widely supported by the Canadian ruling class. Especially enthusiastic have been the country's most important business lobby groups. Business Council of Canada CEO Goldie Hyder praised Justin Trudeau for showing national leadership to end the illegal blockades. Perry Beattie, president of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, applauded the government for upholding the rule of law, which is critical for our economy's ability to function. Even before Trudeau announced that he was proclaiming a public order emergency late Monday afternoon, the trade union-backed New Democratic Party had declared that it would provide the minority Liberal government with the votes it needs to win Parliament's retroactive approval of the government's recourse to emergency measures. Speaking to reporters Monday morning, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh also signaled Canada's Social Democrats would be ready to support the deployment of the military to disperse the far-right, absurdly named Freedom Convoy, should that prove necessary. Insofar as there is any opposition within the political establishment to Trudeau's use of the Emergencies Act, it is coming almost exclusively from the federal Conservative Party, a cabal of hard-right premiers, the most right-wing sectors of the corporate media, and Maxime Bernier and his ultra-right People's Party of Canada. That is, from the same forces that encouraged and built up the far-right Convoy with the aim of using it as a bludgeon to shatter the remaining anti-COVID public health measures and push politics far to the right. The Convoy has negligible popular support, including among truckers, almost 90% of whom are fully vaccinated. Most Canadians view the anti-democratic and chauvinist views of its far-right leaders as an anathema. That the Convoy has nonetheless assumed a menacing, outsized presence is attributable to two factors. First, the support and encouragement it has received from a powerful faction of the Canadian ruling class, as well as far-right forces in the U.S., beginning with Donald Trump and his co-conspirators in the January 6, 2021 coup plot. Second, the trade unions and NDP, in keeping with the role they have played throughout the pandemic in supporting the ruling class's prioritization of profits over lives, have kept the working class politically gagged and subordinated to big business liberal government. Workers must beware. History has repeatedly demonstrated that repressive measures, like the Emergencies Act, implemented by the political representatives of big business in the name of opposing the far-right enemies of the working people are, as the class struggle intensifies, invariably turned against the working class. Trudeau and his supporters claim the invocation of the Emergencies Act is proportionate, upholds the rule of law, and is subject to the constitutional guarantees outlined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In reality, the law, which is the successor to the Draconian War Measures Act, grants the Liberal government sweeping powers. Anyone who enters a government-designated no-go zone can be arrested and is liable to be fined $5,000 and imprisoned for up to 5 years. A blanket prohibition on all public assemblies deemed to go beyond lawful protest has also been imposed. The government can requisition resources, including tow trucks and any other equipment it deems necessary, to break up occupations or any other activities considered to be violations of the emergency resolutions. Banks can be ordered to freeze accounts and prevent transactions they believe will be used to support the convoy. Furthermore, the Emergencies Act empowers the government to impose sweeping new prohibitions and orders at will for the duration of the 30-day emergency. Trudeau claimed Monday that the emergency powers would be geographically targeted. However, the published text of the order in council explicitly states that a public order emergency exists throughout the country. In other words, the government can employ its sweeping powers anywhere it likes. The justifications the order in council gives for invoking the Emergency Act underscore that the Trudeau government is acting in the interests of Canada's capitalist elite, to protect corporate Canada's profits, defend Ottawa's alliance with U.S. imperialism, and maintain the authority of the state. The order published in the Canada Gazette says the emergency powers are necessary because of the threat or use of acts of serious violence against persons or property, including critical infrastructure, for the purpose of achieving a political or ideological objective. Further reasons include the adverse effects on the Canadian economy recovering from the impact of the pandemic, the adverse effects on Canada's relationships with its trading partners, including the United States, the breakdown in the distribution chain and the availability of essential goods, services, and resources, and the potential for an increase in the level of unrest and violence that would further threaten the safety and security of Canadians. Trudeau came under immense pressure last week from big business on both sides of the Canada-US border and from Washington to end the border blockades, with traffic across the Ambassador Bridge, which connects Windsor, Ontario, Detroit, and Michigan, shut down, disrupting hundreds of millions of dollars in trade each day and forcing the closure of auto plants. U.S. President Biden and his top officials made repeated phone calls to their Canadian counterparts to press for police action to reopen the border. Hey, Alistair, how you doing, bud? Good to see you. With the invocation of the Emergencies Act for the first time since its passage in 1988, a significant political taboo has been broken. If the ruling class is ready to use emergency powers to suppress small far-right protests that are disrupting trade, how will it respond to the eruption of mass working-class opposition to its criminal pandemic policy or a new round of capitalist austerity? As it is, the legal right to strike has all been abolished for broad sections of the working class, from teachers to railway workers. The World Socialist website has insisted throughout its coverage of the Ottawa occupation that absent the independent political intervention of the working class, the outcome of the present crisis, however resolved, will be a lurch of official policies sharply to the right. This warning has already been confirmed in spades. The Trudeau government responded to the Convoy's demand for the scrapping of all COVID-19 measures by greenlighting an unseemly scramble by all provinces to jettison the few remaining public health measures as quickly as possible, including mask mandates, capacity limits, and vaccine passports. On Tuesday, the day after it invoked the Emergencies Act, the Trudeau government declared that PCR tests will no longer be required for traveling to Canada. At the same press conference in which he unveiled the government's recourse to emergency powers, Trudeau announced a major escalation of Canada's involvement in the war drive against Russia. Bowing to a months-long campaign led by Conservatives and backed by the media, Trudeau confirmed that his government will send lethal weapons to Ukraine and provide the unstable Zelensky regime with a loan of $500 million. Since Monday, the new emergency powers have had their desired effect on the border blockades. The blockade at the Coutts Crossing in Alberta ended Tuesday, while another blockade in Emerson, Manitoba ended Wednesday after police promised to press no charges. 4 participants in the Coutts blockade have been charged with conspiracy to murder after the police seized a cache of weapons and body armor. In Ottawa, fewer than 150 occupiers and about 360 vehicles remain in the area around Parliament Hill. Facing widespread criticism for the police's kid gloves treatment of the occupiers, Ottawa Police Chief Peter Slowly tendered his resignation Tuesday. Liberal government officials have indicated that they want the occupation over before the weekend to prevent a further growth in the convoy. Asked Wednesday whether force would be used to clear the streets, Trudeau stated that this would be a decision for the police to make. NDP leader Singh reaffirmed his party's support for the government's use of the Emergencies Act yesterday. This stance has created an opening for the Conservatives to cynically posture as defenders of democratic rights. Interim Tory leader Candice Bergen stated yesterday that the official opposition will refuse to support the government's invocation of emergency powers. She combined this with an appeal for the remaining occupiers to go home. The Tories have been joined in their opposition by Quebec sovereigntist Bloc Québécois, which cynically warned of the threat to democratic rights. The BQ's right-wing record includes whipping up Islamophobia and backing Canadian imperialist wars. Opposition to Trudeau's invocation of the Emergencies Act has also come from the hard-right premiers of Alberta and Saskatchewan, Jason Kenney and Scott Moe, who played leading roles in building up the Freedom Convoy. Their attempt to pose as Democrats while courting the far right is absurd. The Kenney government passed a draconian anti-protest law in 2020 that, much like the regulations the Liberals have enacted under the Emergencies Act, prohibits protests at locations deemed to be critical infrastructure. The law was adopted in response to left-wing anti-pipeline protests and demonstrations against police violence. As for Moe, he promoted the far-right United We Roll truckers group, which intimidated and carried out acts of violence against locked-out oil refinery workers at Federated Cooperative Limited in Regina, Saskatchewan in 2020. United We Roll is one of the leading groups within the Freedom Convoy. The events of the past 3 weeks underscore that bourgeois democracy is collapsing in Canada, as in all the historically privileged imperialist states, under the pressure of ever-deepening social inequality, mounting popular opposition, and escalating global geopolitical tensions. Increasingly, the ruling elite is turning to openly authoritarian forms of rule and bringing forward far-right and outright fascist forces as shock troops against the working class. The only progressive way out is through the independent political mobilization of the working class. As the Socialist Equality Party wrote in its statement, Canadian workers need a socialist program to defeat the threat of far-right political violence, end the pandemic, and oppose the war. The fight for a socialist and international program in Canada necessitates an unrelenting struggle for the political and organizational independence of the working class from the pro-austerity, pro-war NDP, and the pro-capitalist trade unions. The claim that workers must support the progressive parties, i.e. the Liberals or the NDP, to stop the hard-right Conservatives, has been used for decades to prevent workers taking the road of independent political struggle. The events of the past week have demonstrated that if the Liberal-NDP Union alliance remains unchallenged, and therefore able to smother working class opposition, this will only further embolden reaction and pave the way for far-right to exploit the deepening social crisis to mobilize support among backward sections of the middle class. What are you guys talking about? I mean, Jagmeet supports the Emergencies Act because Jagmeet cares about power. Like he wants to be the leader of the NDP. Like that's all. Like he likes his position. I knew the Liberals were even. I didn't know the NDP would follow suit. I mean, this moment has been very revealing of the NDP generally, and this assessment by the World Socialist website is fairly accurate. I think that at the end of the day, the NDP and Jagmeet Singh work for the Liberals, right? Fairly straightforward. And the whole political establishment operates on behalf of the billionaire class. Like, under these circumstances, right? The situation that we are looking at, and I remind us all again and again, in North America, all politics is vanity projects. These guys work for the same people, right? Whether you're in the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party or the NDP or the Greens, right? Or the Bloc or the PPC or any of them, you work for the same people, right? You're just attempting to galvanize different sections of the populace to get support because you want to be the leader, right? So in this way, politics in Canada is not about finding solutions to problems. It's literally about just becoming the leader. That when Justin Trudeau runs for office, he's not running for office because he sees a better path for Canada or he has a vision for Canada or any of this stuff. Same thing with Jagmeet Singh, right? They're running because they want to be the Prime Minister of Canada. And that's as far as it gets. It doesn't go farther. Like, and if someone like Pierre Poilievre is the person who gets in, like that's not a problem for the ruling class, the owners of the society, right? And so the divides that we're experiencing in the society today, these conservative liberal divides that exist, are illusionary, right? They don't actually exist, right? Like, you're just voting for the person who you think has the best haircut. Really. Like, that is what is happening. You're really just voting for the person you think you'd like to be your boyfriend, basically. Like, who's going to come to you and tell you what's going on, and who's going to have the pretty face to do it? Like, that's all. Has any of these people in Ottawa to physically see the far-right elements? I mean, Vince, the leadership of the movement itself, like Tamara Litch, Pat King, like, these figures are far-right for sure. But you're correct as well to say that, like, yeah, but like the whole protest, to define the entire protest along those lines, I think is not completely accurate. But certainly those elements are there. I watch 4 hours of live stream dailies, or I try to. It's the most centrist convoy I've ever seen. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, like, I would like to believe that if these guys had to come out and their whole thing had to been like, let's reduce poverty, like let's confront the homelessness crisis, that things may have gone a little bit better for them, right? Like things might have, like they might have galvanized a little bit more public support. And really, I think this is the thing that's really sunk them, right? Is that they weren't able to get the public on side. Would the Trudeau administration have been so willing and ready to use the Emergency Act and clear these out as quickly as he did, if when the polls came out it was like majority support from the public? Who knows? But the truckers themselves didn't do the necessary work in order to galvanize support from the public. And that's a lesson for us on the left, right? That if you go into an area and you alienate the citizens that live in the area, well, you're gonna lose. This is true, though, too, Vince. The Twitter videos really expose how violent the RCMP is. Yeah, well, we remember during the G20, right? During the G20, they were riding horses into groups of people, right? Like they were knocking people over with horses and stuff. Yeah, and Jugmeat is part of the whole World Economic Forum and the Davos stuff as well. Yeah. Why does the NDP trust the Liberals so much? Because they work for the same people, the same organizations with the same goals. That's all. And like I said, for Jagmeet Singh, like Jagmeet Singh is not the leader of the NDP because he's like got a vision for Canada and he's going to do better things for Canada. He's the leader of the NDP because he wants to be the leader of the NDP because it's a prestigious position. And that's the extent of it. Like he's not actually genuinely interested in enacting serious policies in order to actually confront the serious issues that are going on. He just wants to be the leader of the NDP. And so he's like, how do I be the leader of the NDP? This is how you be the leader of the NDP. Right? And that's all politics now. Like in the United States, it's 100% what's going on, with like very, very few exceptions. You can point to somebody like Dennis Kucinich, who's like actually attempting to push forward policies to actually help people. But like, you see how difficult it is for someone like him to actually get anything done, right? Yeah, World Economic Forum, yeah. Boo. In the U.S., many people were calling for the death penalty for peaceful protests, right? Should we want any less for these truckers? Like, I mean, it's like, this is the thing, is like, we're losing our minds. We're losing the forest for the trees, right? Like, sure, are there far-right, like, elements in there? Yeah. I don't think you should deny that. But, like, that doesn't sell out their humanity, right? That they're humans first, citizens second, and then white supremacists, right? And what we are doing is we are selling out our citizenry. We're selling out our own citizenry and our own position as citizens in order to get a dig at these guys for something that's way less important. Like, don't get me wrong, white supremacy is obviously an important issue, but I'm not going to give away my rights in order to get a win on them, right? Which is what we're doing. Like, we're normalizing the use of extraordinary legislation in order to get one over on a culture war enemy. WEF Klaus admitted over 50% of Trudeau's cabinet are WEF graduates and WEF directors. Yeah. Many videos showing Chrystia Freeland wanting to dip her fingers into our bank accounts. Yeah. I mean, Chrystia Freeland is a very dark figure in many ways. Like, I mean, for God's sakes, her grandfather is a Nazi collaborator, and she seems fine with it. Like, that's the thing that kills me the most. Like, if Chrystia Freeland, if somebody had when someone asks Chrystia Freeland and she had said, yes, it's an unfortunate history of my family and it's something I strive to move away from and do better, you know, like, I think we could all look at that and be like, oh yeah, okay, like, you can't control who your family was, especially like your grandfather, right? But that's not what she says. She says that she's proud of the work that her grandfather did as a Nazi collaborator during World War II. Like, pretty big red flag if you ask me, like, literally. Big red flag with a swastika on it. I hate how the mainstream media has covered the protests, but then say a lie long enough, people will believe it. That's how you manufacture consent. Yeah, that's it. And that's all this was, right? It was just a manufacturing of consent. And, I mean, I do think that what we really saw with these protesters was a disorganization, that they really, like the alienation that was experienced in Ottawa. Like the citizens of Ottawa are like calling for blood. Like they're like, get these fucking guys out of here, right? Like, and it really is. It's not on an ideological basis. It's very strictly like they're honking horns all the time. Fuck these guys. Like I'm seeing videos of people who are just like outright chewing these people out, and I think that really stems from just from a basic human reality, which is it doesn't matter if you're right if you're fucking annoying, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're right if you're extremely fucking annoying. And I think that this Freedom Convoy lost a lot of support in the populace simply because of these stories that came out of Ottawa and the treatment of the Ottawa citizenry. That the Ottawa the citizens of Ottawa weren't going like, yeah, it's disruptive and all, but you know, I can see like that they're really trying to build something here, and they're treating us all with respect, right? And all of that. Those aren't the stories that are coming out. Right? It's exactly the opposite. That these truckers showed up and they started abusing people, right? Maybe not physically beating people up, but just like disrespecting the environment, disrespecting the community, constantly aggressively going after like public spaces and things like this. And like I really respect that. Like, yeah, I live here. And this sucks. I hate it. I want them gone because it's annoying. And I don't care about what their ideological position is. So the lesson for leftists as we move forward is like, we have to be very aware. Like, to me, that's really the heart of what happened here. If these truckers had moved in, and if these truckers had gone into Parliament, and really tried to make their case and managed to get the support of the Ottawa citizens themselves, and managed to get those people on side, and the stories that were coming out were actually like were actually even neutral, like maybe not positive but neutral even, I think they probably could have had a better stab at it. But again, I feel like what's happening in our politics these days is that we have forgotten about the base humanity of people. That basic humanity is not in the conversation, which makes sense because we live in an environment that is so false in the first place, that dehumanizes and commodifies us in the first place. And so we're not used to trying to understand one another on a basic human level, right? And then from there, there is also no conception that we are all citizens. We're so used to just being commodities that sell ourselves to capitalists that we don't actually we have to remind ourselves that, oh yeah, we're citizens of Canada, right? We're like I'm not defined as an Amazon worker first, right? That's actually third on the list, right? It's humanity, citizenry, worker, and then the culture war. But we're so hyper focused, and everything is so inundated to augment and heighten the culture war, that we're willing to sacrifice our position as humans, our position as citizens, and our position as workers in order to get a dig on our culture war enemies, right? That's what's going on, and that's the story of this protest as far as I'm concerned. I would even go so far as to say that this Emergencies Act is to destroy the intellectual left. I mean, Alistair, there isn't really a left in Canada anymore. Like there's a couple of people that you can point to, like somebody like Dimitri Lascaris is certainly trying to fight the good fight from the intellectual left, but like there isn't really a left anymore. That what I think is that it's less about trying to build something to destroy the left, because why build something to destroy something that doesn't exist in the first place? I think it's being done because what's going to come is going to be apolitical. It's going to be chaos, right? It's not going to be defined by right, left, any of that. It really is going to be people on the streets because they are homeless suddenly. Like that is what we are heading for. That the wage no longer pays the rent, prices are skyrocketing, housing prices are skyrocketing, everything is imploding, it's happening directly in front of us. People aren't going to be thrown into mass large-scale protest based on ideological reasons. We're not going to all look at each other and be like, yes, I think that we could do a better job of this. Let us go down to the Parliament building and make our case. Like that's really not what's going to happen. It's very much going to be hundreds of thousands of people who have been abandoned by the system entirely, told to get a better job, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You're the author of your own fate, so this is a you problem. Right? Like, that's what these hundreds of thousands of people are going to be told as they're abandoned to the streets. And they're going to protest about it. Right? They're not going to go down quietly. Right? They're going to form like little mobs and little things like this. And the power structure will call them what they want. And certainly there will be like leftist elements within that. Certainly there will be people like myself who are able to get in as many people as I can in order to try to mobilize people in organized and rational ways. Certainly that's going to happen, but it's mainly going to be chaos. And I think that the evocation of this Emergencies Act is not specifically to go after an organized left, because there is no organized left. I think it really is just to deal with the chaos that is coming. That you have to be a total moron. Like a total, like, in the ditch, like you don't know, like a Jordan Peterson level incoherent moron to believe that there's anything other than mass chaotic protest coming. And it's not going to be organized. Like it is just going to be a mass of humanity. And so the evocation of these emergency acts is being done to deal with that. Right? Like the ruling class has lost control of the situation. That their strategy is take the wealth they've extracted and are continuing to extract out of the society, retreat behind your gated communities, right? Put a line of cops in front of that, and then any protests that go around and actually lock down important infrastructure, such as bridges and the like, send strike crack teams in there using the Emergencies Act and break it up. Right? Like, that's what it's going to be. And, like, what's coming is not going to be organized. Like, that I think is what's really crucial to understand. That there will be figures that come out of it, certainly. There will be individuals who, because we live in a society of individualism, that where everybody's supposed to individualize their individualism, right? And that's how the death cult communicates about these things. Well, they'll find those people and they'll punish those people, and those people will be arrested and all of that kind of stuff. But that's not going to change the reality that hundreds of thousands of people are just going to be living in the streets and aren't going to have anywhere to go. And the systems that are in place now will be completely overwhelmed. So I don't think it's about destroying, because, like, destroy the intellectual. There is no intellectual left. Like, it doesn't really exist. I think it's just about chaos and dealing with the coming chaos of humanity. That humanity itself will just be like a big monster. And it's going to be confused, and it's going to be wounded, and it's not going to know what to do. And so it's going to try to smash things. One of the 11 men arrested carrying a cache of semi-automatic weapons at the Canadian border hours before Trudeau's draconian declaration of emergency. Mounties admit they are not part of the Freedom Convoy. Yeah, that's pretty typical. Same thing happened during the G20. Same thing happened during the Occupy movement. Right? There's always just some kooky person. Right? Like, and but that can't be part of the conversation. You can't have us, like, this is kind of what I was just talking about, right? Like, just because something happens while this is going on doesn't mean it's being directed by the organizers or is even part of the movement. That humanity is chaotic. Like, it's like a force unto itself. And once it's unleashed, which it is going to be unleashed, you're going to see how chaotic it can get. And it can be quite chaotic. Saskatchewan is getting a new NDP leader, lost a seat they held over 20 years. Why? Because nobody sees the NDP as a solution anymore. Yeah. And they left to join the SKP. Yeah. Yeah. The NDP aren't really standing up with even the most modest of solutions any longer. Not really. Like, and if they do have solutions in their platform, they're certainly not talking about them. Right? Like, take a look at somebody like Andrea Horwath. Like, Andrea Horwath is as weak a leader as I've ever seen. Like, you're telling me you can't stand up and actually, like, pound the pulpit on things like a basic income, even raising the minimum wage or lowering rent. Like, these are all things that are part of the party platform, but they're just completely unwilling to actually, like, pound the pulpit about it. Like, they just don't have the energy or the power to do so. Or the willingness to do so, because at the end of the day, all politics is a vanity project. Andrea Horwath isn't running because she sees a problem in her society that needs to be fixed. She's running because she wants to be the premier, because it's just a vanity project. Judge has ruled that Chris Barber is to be released on condition that he goes home. Yeah. This is why de-escalation is important to communicate it with law enforcement. Yeah. Did Parliament suspend debate today? Yes, they're going to resume Monday. The vote is on Monday. NDP said they're split. No, it's going to pass. For sure it's going to pass. The Liberals would have never reached for this tool if they weren't certain that it would pass. Like, can you imagine how much of an embarrassment it would be for a minority Liberal government amidst this crisis to reach for this tool and then get shut down by the rest of the... Like, no. They always knew that it was going to pass. And, like, everything that we're seeing in the House is just theatrics, right? The Conservatives aren't genuinely against the usage of the Emergencies Act. Like, not really. Like, if it was a Conservative in power right now, they'd be using the Emergencies Act, right? It's just theatrics so that they can pass the ball back between one another, right? So that if you are voting along these lines of like, oh, they're so draconian, they use the Emergency Act, I'm going to swing over to the Conservatives. Well, fucking guess what? Like, it's the same fucking party. Like, I feel like I'm losing my mind a little bit on this, and I feel like I'm like watching people, like really what it is I'm watching people who actually think the WWE is real. I think that's really what it comes down to, and why it's so fucking exhausting. Because people keep doubling down on this idea that the politics that you're seeing in the House and all of this is in any way real, or is in any way something other than completely manufactured. You're watching the WWE and you're dead convinced that you're trying to convince me with like all of the passion that you have in your heart. You're trying to convince me that wrestling is real. And I'm just like, bro, like, it's not. Like, it's completely fake. The storylines are there. The whole thing is fucking manufactured. Like, do they have to respond to real things that occur in the world? Yeah, of course they do. Just like in wrestling when something unexpected happens and then they've got to get into kind of an improvisational space and they have to, like, do other things and all that kind of stuff. It happens all the time in WWE wrestling. But, like... The Conservatives aren't genuine in what they're doing, and the Liberals are acting on behalf of the same people that the Conservatives work for. This is the reason why we have to surround the halls of power, because our political forces are allied with each other against everybody. They work exclusively for a small cabal of capitalists. Exclusively. And to talk about it any other way is to just fall into this kind of delusional belief that the WWE is actually what wrestling looks like. Like, this isn't politics, what we're experiencing, right? It just looks like it. It just has like a veneer of politics. This guy stands up and says, ah, bah, 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 and this guy goes, bah, 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 and this guy goes, bah, 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 but it's all fucking meaningless. Like we were watching in the House yesterday, right? But none of them were bringing up like, hey, we could pass like support systems and shit, right? Like we could actually deal with a lot of the material concerns that are underpinning all of this, right? Literally no one said it. And why? Because that's not part of the deal, right? That's not part of what the capitalists want to have into the conversation at all. I mean, Greens were pretty bad in the debate yesterday. I mean, the Greens are essentially a non-entity right now. Their inclusion in the, like, why do they exist? Like, for real. Like, if they're not going to be led by a socialist who's actually attempting to push things in a socialist way, then they're basically just liberals, right? Like, they don't serve a purpose anymore. Yeah, it seems they're vying for the manufacturing consent works, May and Jugmeat would 100% swore. Yeah. Every time I see far right with the convoy, I'm like, yes, Iraq has nukes and Uyghur genocide is 1,000. Well, I'm like, Vince, I mean, people like Tamara Litch, people like Pat King, like these people are central organizers of that protest. Like that is real. So but it is the hyper focusing. It's the hyper focus on it that is what's interesting. So we need to organize the people before the far right can. I mean, that's the goal. That's the idea, right? But I mean, the far right is typically like, I mean, this is what happened with Adolf Hitler, right? Adolf Hitler received a huge amount of funding from the capitalist class, and ultimately the capitalist class is more than happy to work with the far right. I mean, leadership is a thing, but the people there are not far right. Yes, I agree, and you're right about that. Pat King is not leadership, and in fact, the leadership of the thing denounced Pat King in the end of it all. And by declaring this Emergencies Act, I've been saying it this whole time. By declaring the Emergencies Act, the people who are at these protests who were not far right are going to be driven in that direction. Right? That this emboldens the far right more than anything. Like someone like Tamara Litch is now a martyr, right? Like she's been martyred now, and you can expect in like 2 to 3 years that she's going to be back and she's going to have a ton of support behind her because people are going to view her as a martyr now. Yeah, PP is nothing but red flags, of course. No, of course. Like the PPC is hugely, like the reason they exist is because the conservatives attempted to swing to the left, and the people who were voting for the conservatives were like, no, we want a far right party, thank you very much. And the thing that's scariest about the PPC is that when they talk, they sound A, very genuine, but B, they understand better than the conservatives do and the liberals do that something's gone wrong. Like when these guys get to talking, they're very persuasive and they sound like communists until it comes time to actually find solutions. And then when you listen to their solutions, they're just like Looney Tunes, like libertarians to the max, right? So like when it comes to identifying the problems of what's going on in the society, they're actually fairly accurate. But then their solutions are just nuts. Like literally just do more capitalism harder is really what they think. And like, oh yeah, the solution is actually to just completely gut all social services and abandon the populace to capitalist forces as hard as possible, and that'll solve it. Like, big yikes. Like, big yikes. Yeah, I think it would have been better if it went on more than just mandates. 100% like UBI and yeah, like almost anything, right? Like, and that was another part of it is that like in the end these protests are fairly self-effacing. Like they're like the mandates really only mattered to them, right? And honestly, I've talked to enough of these guys to be like, I think that these mandates actually would have been and are actually something of a negative for these guys, like in terms of their daily life and in terms of what they can achieve and all that kind of stuff. Like, I understand why they're protesting against them, because I do think that the mandates were going to be a hardship for these guys beyond what is reasonable to expect, right? But I think because it's so, like, it's just them, that they didn't have a policy that had mass appeal, and I really think that's and recently they came out and they had like, do I have that in front of me? I hope I do. They recently came out with a like 6 things that we. You know what? I should find that actually. The trucker convoy demands. Because I don't know what to search in order to find that. I had it at one point though, and that's annoying. But like I remember reading through, they had like 7 or 6 demands that they actually had, and they were very, very selfish. Like very much like truckers should rule the world kind of shit. Like that's obviously not, but like they don't seem to have an idea of we need to cast a much wider net than this, and I think that didn't help them. Yeah, he was WEF until last summer, major red flag. I can see him winning a CPC majority, but Klaus might be ready for that. During G20 and wet sweating, RCMP should be abolished. Yeah, good luck on that one. Jugmeat said it's too much. Like, I mean, really, that's not going to happen. Like, just straight up abolishing the RCMP? No. Like, that's straight up not going to happen. According to the Premier, it's actually 3 progressive conservative MPPs announcing tonight they're no longer running for re-election. Oh, I know, buddy. I know. You don't have any peanut butter. I know. Here, I'm going to get down to the bottom here. Yeah, WWE is real. Exactly. Alistair, yeah, of course you'd think that, bud. I'm just fucking with you, bud. I remember being a kid and being like, yeah, WWE's real, man. Yeah. Like, it was when the UFC came out. When the UFC came out, and I watched the very first UFC, and I was like, no, this is all bullshit. Like, for sure it is. The UFC is real. Wet, Sweat, and Land Defenders have had their funding frozen during using the Emergency Act, yeah? The trucker convoy is being used as cover to deal with other current left-wing movements. Yeah, for sure, right? Like, for sure. If I could get a confirmation on that, yeah, I've been there, Loaf, don't worry about it. But, like, I'm for sure. Like, we all know that that's going to happen. Like, I mean, I shouldn't say that we all know, but, like, I've been saying that since the outset. Like, of course, you don't pass something as broad sweeping as the Emergencies Act and then just like what, not use it? And Justin Trudeau has outright said, like, think about this. Justin Trudeau has outright said that he's more concerned about the left wing than the right. Like, he's outright said that in public. And this while there is like an ongoing protest movement coming from the right, but you know they're not attempting to stop a pipeline from being pushed through. It's on at the Real Keenan on Twitter. You scroll down, find it. Him. Oh yeah, okay. Let's because I want to show this because I think it really the twits because I think it really does capture kind of what I'm talking about. The Real Keenan. But I wouldn't be surprised, right? I wouldn't be surprised. I think that's the point. Yeah, here we go. 5 demands of the Freedom Convoy, right? So, number 1, end vaccine passports and mandates. This one I actually understand. I get it. Like, I get why they wouldn't want to have these vaccine passports or mandates or any of this kind of stuff. Because it really isn't as simple as, like, a piece of paper, right? Like, there's actually like an electronic aspect to it as well. And it's turning into something of a tracking device issue, right? And you got to think, like, a lot of these guys are private contractors. Yeah, and truckers are 90% vaccinated, but it isn't about the vaccination. Like, that's a big thing that I learned about this, is that it isn't actually about the vaccination. It's about this implementing something like a tracking device so that these private businessmen will now be tracked wherever they go and whatever they do, right? Like, I can respect why you wouldn't want to have a government, like, it's different from a license. It's not the same thing. And that's not being well articulated, right? It's not being well understood for obvious reasons. Number 2, protect businesses. See, this, again, though, this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Like, it isn't protect people. It isn't protect citizens. It isn't protect the homeless. It isn't protect the poor. It isn't any of that. Protect businesses. Like my own personal business that I am in protest over. So it's got a very, like, selfish ring to it. Like, it isn't protect workers. It's protect businesses, right? And so you're losing. You're losing on the world stage with this. End mask mandates. I mean, that one's got a very, like, selfish sort of ring to it. Revoke the state of emergency, yet respect freedom of choice. I mean, like, these are so, like, broad sweeping, but it's all like it's all, like, selfish. It's all just, like, for us, and, like, we want this for us, and we don't act like, if it benefits you, I guess, but we want it for us. And because of that, I think it really has, that's the reason why they couldn't galvanize the support of the populace, right? Yeah, so many of those 90% are part of the convoy. Yeah, people keep leaving that one out. Yeah, that's true. Well, and because I think that this is actually larger than the vaccination issue, right? Like, point number 1, it's not about vaccination. Right? It's not. It's about needing this, like, electronic card that tracks you. Like, that's what it's about. And I'm like, yeah, kind of understandable. Like, I wouldn't want, if the government gave me a little card that said, hey, this is a little electronic chip and it's gonna track you wherever you go, I'd be like, no, why? No thanks. Like, not interested. My guess is 50% fully vaccinated, 50% unvaccinated as part of the convoy. The Washington Post said the belief of entitlement to freedom is a key component of white supremacy. I mean, who cares what the New York fucking Times says? Or the Washington Post, especially. I mean, the Washington Post is Bezos, right? Thoughts on Leslyn Lewis? She might run against Pierre, not sure, though. If not, she could be Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah, I think it's Pierre Poilievre, right? Like, he's the guy. I don't think anybody's going to really try too hard against him. Like, there'll be some figures. But that said, the way the system works is very wonky, right? It's a very, like, there's many, not wonky, but, like, there's oh, I know, buddy, you don't have any peanut butter. Okay, guys, I got to take care of my dog for just 2 seconds, so chair stream. Okay, buddy, let's hit you. You're a good boy. Chair stream. Here we are with a chair stream. We like to have a chair. Gotta get my dog some peanut butter. He's a good boy, like no other. Good boy with a face just like a tiny little frog. He's a good boy with a face. He's a good dog. There you go, buddy. Okay. Sorry, had a little pug-related crisis there. A network of far-right evangelical pastors helped occupy Ottawa and block U.S.-Canada borders. This sort of speaks to what I've been saying all along about the religious organizations here in Canada, right? Like, what's so interesting about this protest moment is that the right is doing everything that I'm saying that we should be doing, right? They're locking down key infrastructure. They're surrounding the halls of power. The religious organizations are actually taking to the street. They're actually mobilizing and doing something, right? Like, and it is because they perceive what is occurring as an upswell of the stripping of their freedoms. Like, these guys are living in the same world that we live in, right? They just lack the ability to articulate what's actually going on. they don't understand that capitalism itself is structurally the issue. Like, they don't understand how the financial system works. They don't understand how any of this actually goes. All they really understand is things are getting worse, and it's got to be Trudeau's fault, right? Like, things were better before Trudeau showed up, right? It's got to be Trudeau's fault, without recognition or realization that, like, this is the way that capitalism is going to go. Right? It's going to decline in this way, one way or the other. And so I respect, and this is the reason why I think half of Canada actually feels a bit sympathetic towards them. Because we're all frustrated and we're all angry. We all know our country is going in the wrong direction. We all know that things are going badly, right? And nobody knows what to do about it, least of all these guys. Right? But at least what they're doing makes a type of sense, right? And in truth, their actions are very powerful, but their demands are so disconnected from what's actually going on that they can't actually galvanize the public. Because when the public hears their demands, they're like, nope, not accurate, right? Nope. Did not really doesn't resonate with me, right? Doesn't actually speak to my lived experience, right? But at the same time, like, they're the ones that are doing it. They're the ones that are coming out, and they're the ones that are fighting, right? Yeah, it is a worldwide movement for sure. And honestly, in my view, all it needs to do is take a pivot and suddenly start saying things like, hey, maybe we should ensure that people have food and shelter. Like, maybe we should ensure that the public is actually taken care of in serious ways, right? Like, stop buying into this idea that you can just get a job. Like, that's the most embarrassing part about it, is that amidst all of this, these guys are literally saying, like, we just need to do capitalism harder. And it's like, dude, like, do you not understand? And the truth is that they don't understand that the capitalist system itself is what's at issue. Like, if you want to talk about what the heart and the soul and the core of what is occurring here in Canada and the United States, it's that we have a capitalist system that is failing. And you're not going to improve things by simply saying, let's do this failing system harder. Right? And it's this lack of an ability to articulate the truth of people's lived experience and to understand what's actually going on in the society that means that they didn't garner the support of the populace. Right? Eli David, ex-Mossad director, penned a new letter with other doctors in Israel calling anti-Semitic in a way for calling the convoy Nazi. 2022 can't get any more crazy. Oh yeah, it can get way crazier than this. You wait, it gets crazier than this, bud. It straight up, it does. It gets crazier than this. You watch. Like, we still are pretending like we have a democratic structure, right? Like, so, like the Americans are a bit more advanced in this way, where like they're pretending like they have a democratic structure, right? Like, it is still technically possible that in Canada there is like an upswell of political energy that gets funneled into the House, and something serious occurs, right? That's still technically possible here in Canada. It's not possible in America. That there is no, like, the entirety of the American populace, if it funneled all of its energy into the halls of power, it would be diffused, because that's the structure of it. That's how it works. And it would be diffused just with the simple systems that exist. And that's by design. So the democracy that exists in the United States is strictly illusionary. It's strictly theatrical. And we can, and once it becomes obvious and overt that that is the case, like, the ruling class will eventually rule without it. Like, that's going to happen, like, in our lifetimes. Like, let's not fucking bullshit ourselves about this. There is a moment coming where the United States democratic structure is just going to be done away with. And the ruling class will just simply say, yeah, we own this place. What are you going to do about it? Right? And they'll erect some kind of different communicative structure that is inherently non-democratic so that they can talk to one another. And in fact, they've already done that. It's called Davos, right? Like these economic forums and all this kind of stuff. Like that's what the billionaire class actually talks. Like that's where they actually do business and they actually make decisions with one another. They don't give a shit at all about this like democratic like what are you talking about? Like they don't care about like the Republican Democratic Party and that dynamic and all that kind of stuff, because why do you think they keep funding people like Mitch McConnell, whose entire thing is don't do anything, right? Because they've got what they want, right? They own what they want, they have what they want, and all they really care about now is dismantling this structure that can technically strip them of their power. But like, so get rid of it. Get rid of the one edifice that can actually strip you of your power. And they will, right? And they absolutely will. And so can it get crazier than this? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It can get way crazier than this, right? And we're not even talking about war. Like we're not even talking about war yet. We're not talking about any of that kind of stuff yet. Like, and there's this phenomenon that occurred during in periods of war, and it was Ionesco, who was a playwright in Europe, wrote a play called The Rhinoceros, right? And it was an absurdist play about how all of the people around him suddenly became rhinoceroses, how regular, normal people who he would consider quite politically either inactive or centrist suddenly became fucking Nazis, right? And just like regular, normal citizens started to talk about like some very dark, insidious stuff. We'll see the exact same turn, and I'm already seeing it, right? The people who are giddily clapping their hands while watching these like people like Tamara Lich get arrested, right? And who are gloating about it, like that dark energy is going to be using, right? That dark energy is going to be used, and it's going to manifest itself. And the people who do evil always think they're doing good. Always, 100% of the time. Even the Nazis. As the Nazis were committing a genocide, they said it was from righteousness and goodness, right? How does the song go? Get a haircut, get a real job. Yeah, I mean, it's real helpful stuff there in a society that's in collapse, right? You will own nothing and you will be happy. Yeah, I mean, I don't really care to own anything. Like, that's my big thing. Like, I truly don't. Like, it seems to be more of a burden than anything. Like, I'd be very happy just like this whole thing is so fucking dumb that like you've got to stand up and say something about it, right? Like it just is getting to this sort of heightened state of ridiculousness now, and where we're literally celebrating our own suppression, right? We're like literally celebrating our own suppression, and it does it get crazier than that, where we're like, imagine like your town is burning down and you're celebrating it. Like it's like Nero playing the fiddle as Rome burns, right? What are we supposed to do? Oh, I know, buddy, I know. Look, you've got peanut butter. I can see that you've got peanut butter, bud. I can see that you've got peanut butter. What's this? That's peanut butter. Why don't you look on the other side? Weirdo. Ugh. I'm so tired, guys. I'm so tired. Like, that's the dumbest part about all of this, is that while all this crazy nonsense is going on, we're all just supposed to keep working. Yeah, everybody just keep working, just keep going to do that job. Yeah, forget about climate change, forget about all that. Like, forget about the housing crisis, forget about Forget about the collapsing society. Forget about any of that, right? Just make sure you go to Wendy's and flip those burgers, right? Make sure that you keep working your minimum wage job, or it's so fucking stupid. Like, we live in such a fucking stupid society, and that's getting stupider. Like, that's getting stupider with no sign that it's going to turn the corner. With no sign that it's even going to be like, maybe we shouldn't be so goddamn fucking stupid. Like, it's getting stupider. And I don't think it's going to stop. The thing about those arrests of the far right is completely hypocritical of the support of the Ukraine government. Yeah, the Gravel Institute demonstrated how the Ukraine government is actually a far right party that dates back to World War II, where the leader supported a Nazi and the nationalists support. Yeah. Alternatively, we could all just take a nap. I like that idea. You keep referencing this Gravel Institute. Yeah, here we go. Let's take a moment.
Ukraine.
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 Ukraine. Ukraine. You've probably heard about that country a lot. For the last few years, Ukraine has been one of the most important conflict points in the world. It's the site of a proxy war between Russia and the United States.
Russia could launch an attack on Ukraine any day now.
We are ready, and all of NATO is ready.
But it's also a place most people don't really know a lot about. So the story we hear about Ukraine's history and its conflict today has very little relationship to reality. I'm going to tell you a story about modern Ukraine, but this is also a story about America and how American money and weapons ended up in the hands of these guys, the neo-Nazis and ultranationalists of Ukraine's far right. Let's start in 1991, when Ukraine became fully independent from the Soviet Union. And independence was tough. After the fall of communism, the economies of post-Soviet republics were falling apart. State institutions were being hollowed out. A so-called gangster capitalism was becoming dominant. So in the 1990s, Ukraine's economy and quality of life collapsed, and it's never really gotten better. Adjusted for inflation, Ukraine's GDP per capita was higher in 1990 than it was in 2020. Health outcomes are abysmal. In 2019, the life expectancy of Ukrainian men was lower than in Syria, Iraq, and North Korea. And as quality of life collapsed, nationalism flourished. Some people turned to extremist politics. And that was partly because Ukrainian nationalism, formed in opposition to the Soviet Union, tended to have a strongly right-wing flavor. To understand that, we have to look at a crucial figure in Ukrainian nationalist history, a guy named Stepan Bandera. You see, in the 1930s and 40s, Bandera wanted Ukrainian independence from Poland and the Soviet Union. So when the Nazis invaded, Bandera allied with them. His followers massacred huge numbers of Poles and Jews. But in spite of this legacy, Bandera is still viewed as a hero in the west of Ukraine. There are Stepan Bandera streets, museums, and monuments. In 2010, Bandera was even named an official hero of Ukraine. But Bandera is hated in the East, where Soviet identity was historically a lot stronger. And that East-West divide was a big fracture within Ukraine. In Western Ukraine, there was more stress on a specifically Ukrainian identity, closer to Europe. In Eastern Ukraine, meanwhile, people were more likely to stress their historic ties to Russia and the Russian language. Fast forward to 2010, when Ukraine elected a relatively pro-Russian politician named Viktor Yanukovych as its president, with strong support from voters in the East. Yanukovych pursued a regionalist and Russia-friendly agenda, which angered people in the West. And in 2013, Yanukovych announced that he was suspending discussions on Ukrainian integration with Europe. That decision sparked a protest movement centered in Kyiv called Euromaidan, after the Maidan Square where it took place.
In Kiev, thousands of Ukrainians continue to protest against the government's decision to hold off on signing a deal with the EU.
In the West, Euromaidan was seen as a peaceful, pro-democracy movement, and most participants really were ordinary people who were angry at the government. But as the protests grew, encouraged by a harsh repression from the police and a brutal sniper attack that killed dozens of protesters and police alike, a new, more sinister element emerged and began to hijack the movement. The ultranationalists came on the scene.
It was often the nationalists who were the loudest and the most violent. A group calling itself the Right Sector is perhaps the largest. Its members can be seen marching around Kiev in columns of about a dozen.
Groups like the, quote, Right Sector, the ultranationalist Svoboda Party, originally called the Social National Party of Ukraine, try turning those words around, acted as a small but influential organized minority within the protests. And those extremists played an important role in exacerbating the protests by encouraging violence and more radical rhetoric. There are allegations that the sniper attack was actually orchestrated by the Right Sector and its co-conspirators. By early 2014, the government lost the ability to control the protests.
In a rapidly evolving political crisis, President Yanukovych has been voted out by parliament, forced to leave Kiev.
And the US recognized interim government that replaced him had a significant far-right faction. The Deputy Prime Minister, the Minister of Defense, and others were all from that far-right party, Svoboda. And this led to backlash in the East, because Eastern Ukrainians were horrified at what they saw as a far-right seizure of power, with veneration of Bandera and elimination of equal recognition for languages like Russian.
Service industry workers have since January been obliged to talk to customers in Ukrainian unless clients specifically ask to switch.
If I work, pay my employees' salaries and my taxes, it's none of your bloody business which language I do it in.
Anti-government protests broke out across the East. In the eastern peninsula of Crimea, people were furious. Many of them talked about joining Russia, so the Russian government saw an opportunity. They wanted to encourage a surge of Russian nationalism for its own benefit. So Russia annexed Crimea and held a disputed referendum to legitimize the decision.
As many as 95.5% of the electorate in Crimea have voted to join Russia. We are going back home. Crimea is in Russia.
Energized by the annexation and supported by Russian armed and military personnel, the anti-government protests became a full-blown secessionist movement. Eastern provinces like Donetsk and Luhansk held separatist referendums and declared independence. The new government branded these rebellions as, quote, terrorist actions. Ukraine entered a civil war, which was also a proxy war with Russia. But after decades of austerity and corruption, the Ukrainian army was totally unable to fight. So a lot of the action fell instead to the people who were the most violent, the ultranationalists. So a new paramilitary emerged. It was called the Azov Battalion. And unlike the official Ukrainian military, Azov's volunteers were willing to go the distance. But Azov wasn't just any random organization. It was a pretty disturbing far-right group. It had come out of neo-Nazi street gangs that had been used as muscle by Ukrainian elites in the 90s and 2000s. Azov members regularly sported tattoos of swastikas. Their symbol was based on a Nazi emblem. Their leader declared that their mission was to, quote, lead the white races of the world in a final crusade against the Semite-led Untermenschen, subhumans. But Azov's neo-Nazism turned out not to be such a huge concern to the Ukrainian government. Because in 2014, a guy named Arsen Avakov became interior minister in charge of police and security. And Avakov had been a long-time patron of the neo-Nazi gangs. And when he was a regional governor, he used them as enforcers. So when he became interior minister, Avakov had the Azov Battalion incorporated into Ukraine's National Guard. Ukraine is the only country to have a neo-Nazi formation in its military. So as the war was heating up, the US government announced it would start helping the Ukrainian government.
We're upholding the principle that bigger nations can't bully the small by opposing Russian aggression and supporting Ukraine's democracy and reassuring our NATO allies.
It would send money, training, and, quote, defensive lethal aid, weapons. And as all that flowed in, Azov became a beneficiary. The research group Bellingcat showed that Azov was receiving access to American grenade launchers. A Daily Beast investigation showed that US trainers were unable to prevent aid from reaching neo-Nazis. And Azov itself posted a video of the unit welcoming representatives from NATO. Some in the US were concerned about all of this. They warned that arming neo-Nazis would pose a threat to Ukrainian minorities and to Ukrainian democracy. But whenever Congress tried to ban funding for Azov, the Defense Department had those provisions removed. So the US continued funding Azov for years. It wasn't until 2018 that funding was banned, and that the State Department labeled Azov a, quote, nationalist hate group. Ukraine is still mired in a war on its territory, and the Russian government likes to use Ukrainian nationalists in its propaganda, part of its practice of painting all Ukrainians as Nazis. Of course, those claims aren't really true. But Ukraine still does have a serious and militarized neo-Nazi problem, and Western support extends beyond Azov. Even today, far-right groups continue to benefit from training by Western countries. American politicians have met with far-right leaders.
People of Ukraine, this is your moment.
During the protests, American Senator John McCain made a public appearance with a leader of the far-right Svoboda Party. This guy. He had previously been kicked out of Ukraine's parliament for extreme anti-Semitism. And here's that same guy meeting with then Vice President Joe Biden. So since the 2014 uprising, Ukraine's far right has become increasingly powerful. Azov veterans have been given high positions in the security services. In 2016, Andriy Perubi, pictured here when he was leading a neo-Nazi party in the 90s, became Speaker of the Ukrainian parliament, even as he continued to offer praise for Adolf Hitler. Here's Perubi meeting with John McCain. The new Ukrainian government even made it a criminal offense to deny Bandera's heroism. And in 2021, the United States and Ukraine were the only two countries to vote against a UN resolution condemning the glorification of Nazism. A climate of impunity has developed around far-right violence. Attacks against Roma and gay people go unpunished. A 2018 report found that Ukraine had more incidents of anti-Semitic hate crimes than all other post-Soviet republics combined. So that's the story of how the far right helped cause the country to fracture. But it's also a story about America, how America's support helped legitimize the far right and allowed it to build influence. And that's a pattern you see over and over in American foreign policy, getting involved in places we don't really understand and supporting groups, lesser evils, that we think serve our interests, and then being surprised when the blowback hits us in the face. In Central America, in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, and now in Ukraine. I'm Hadia Afzal, Advocacy Associate for Just Foreign Policy for the Gravel Institute.
Yeah, right? That's what the U.S. does. It's becoming so rote. It's becoming so like right at the end, she's like, yeah, look at this map. There's this map that they use, right? And it's like, yeah, it's literally all they've ever done. It's all they ever do. And for some reason, when the story comes out, it's like it's completely fresh and new to the public. Like it's completely just like, oh, this is a different place, and so obviously the steps are different, and they're not. It's the same thing over and over and over again. And we're just like falling into something of absurdity. And it's tiring, man. I'm tired. I am actually. I'm ridiculously tired right now. That's the thing I think that's really not catching me off guard, but that I'm just when I first started this, I have this anticipation that there's going to be some kind of linearness, that people are going to oh, this event happened, and so people will understand that when this event happens, it's very much the same, and they don't. They just don't. There's no connective tissue inside of the mind of people about yeah, what we're doing in like Venezuela and the illegitimacy there, and what we did in Afghanistan, the illegitimacy there, right? All of that, it's the same as what's going on in Ukraine, and it's just as illegitimate. No, well, you're just supporting Putin. You're just a Putin simp. You're just trying to defend the Putins and the Russians. That's what you're doing. Like, bro. Yeah. And to me, it also shows the total hypocrisy of Justin Trudeau by funding the Ukraine. Well, and like, absolutely. You want to come up, bud? Like, him calling this convoy a far-right movement with, like, that saying things like, oh, the conservatives are supporting people who fly swastikas. It's like, yeah, nobody has been a bigger supporter of Nazis than the Trudeau administration. They've literally funded and trained and armed neo-Nazi groups. Like, no one has done more to further the cause of neo-Nazism in today's world than the Trudeau administration. Like, maybe the United States. Like, maybe the United States. But, like, the Trudeau administration is a pretty close second. And so it's like, and you start talking this way to people, they just don't believe you. They just refuse to understand or believe you. And it's just like, it's like that Mark Twain quote, right? It's easier to trick someone than it is to convince someone that they've been tricked. And in the meantime, Canadian real estate jumps another 30,000. It's never grown faster. Like, and it's all tied together. Like, that's the thing I think people really don't understand, is that it's all tied together. It's all the same problem, right? And if I were to create a Venn diagram of what the problems in the world are, in the dead center of that would be the billionaire class. That you've got a class of people who are operating exclusively to increase their own wealth and prestige. That's the only reason they operate. And they don't care what they need to destroy in order to do it, clearly. Right? They don't care at all. Milo, buddy, you're just literally sitting there whining at nothing. What can I do for you? What do you need? Use your words. Well, not your words, but I'm out of peanut butter for you, bud. Like, I'm out of peanut butter. There's no more peanut butter. Like, that's over. You gotta go grocery shopping. Get the guy some peanut butter. Poor little guy. Don't you wish that the problems that you had were on the same scale as a little pug? I don't have any peanut butter. I'm all out of peanut butter. Oh no, help me with my peanut butter. Well, buddy, what do we got? Oh, there's a little bit left there. There you go, buddy. Little cartoon character, man. And like, well, John, how are housing prices tied into all of this? Well, it's pretty clear, right? Like, if the citizenry can't get access to housing, right? If the citizenry can't get access to this, and why can't they get access to housing? Right? Because the billionaire class is buying it all up. And any finances that needed to be used in order to actually help the working class and help the people, right, is being funneled into places like Ukraine, right? And ultimately, the crises that come from all of this are just going to be funneled into into police forces in order to suppress the populace. It's too much, man. It's too much. I'm too tired right now, man. Like, really. Like, I'm really feeling tired. Like, I'm trying to be like a reliable source, and I'm trying to be like professional and trying to get it all done for you guys, but man, like, Daniel Dumbrill, recently interview with the CBC, demonstrates how mainstream media twist the fact to fit their narrative and how people like him are being silent. which of course demonstrate how ill-informed we are about global issues. Oh yeah, and I actually really like Daniel Dumbrill. What happened with him and the CBC? Dumbrill CBC.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. Today, I will finally be sharing my full, unedited interview with Steven D'Souza for the CBC's flagship news program, The National. Now, I say unedited, but the only thing I cut out was from the beginning portion of the conversation when we were kind of getting to know each other and talking about our old stomping ground.
For those of you who don't know, Daniel Dumbrill is a YouTuber who has been fairly instrumental, frankly, on talking about the Uyghur genocide issue, right? Like he's been fairly central, if you ask me, an important figure on that. And so I'm surprised to see that that the National would actually even have a conversation with him.
Because it turns out actually we grew up in
this
towns.
This is the video you're talking about? What am I searching here, Eric? Because I am actually interested. And honestly, I'm extremely tired. So I'm more than happy to put up some videos today. It's an earlier video.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another...
This the one?
Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. And for those of you who found yourself here after seeing my interview on the CBC's The National, after it actually airs, welcome to my channel. I'm making this video before my interview is scheduled to air on...
Sure, bud. Oh yeah, of course. Of course his channel is constantly being rated. Of course it would be. Right? Like he's got over 100,000 subscribers now, 166,000 subscribers. Like that puts him as not a major part, but he's significant. You can't ignore him. And now you've got the CBC actually talking to him, right? Like it's if the CBC is even talking to him, it means that gives him quite a bit of credibility, right?
Hey everyone, and welcome to another video. As some of you may know by now, the CBC, a Canadian state-sponsored news outlet, did an ironic piece searching for state-sponsored influencers abroad, specifically in China. I was included as a suspect. Now, I knew going in that the most likely outcome would be that I'd be taken out of context to fit their story, or I'd be totally dropped. With that in mind, as I answered their questions, I was especially conscious of how they'd be searching for a soundbite to misrepresent me on. I was fairly satisfied with how the interview went, and I was certain I made their job pretty difficult. I thought that I had made it so difficult that their only choice would be to cut me from their piece and stick to speculating about me from afar. In this ironic piece, led by journalist Steven D'Souza, he acts as though he's searching for a sellout state-sponsored propagandist shilling for a paycheck, which he inadvertently ends up demonstrating that all along, he is everything that he had been searching for and so much more.
Maybe the true state-funded propagandists were the friends we made along the way.
More. What I'll lay out for you here today will show you how media outlets like the CBC work and leave a valuable case study for future propaganda researchers to eventually study.
Now this is going to be good. This is going to be good for all of us because not only is it going to be good from a straight up just like Daniel Dumbrill's support or debunking of the Uyghur genocide nonsense, but also he's taking it from... This is a good opportunity to see how the CBC operates and how it is operating, right? And so I'm glad that we're going to go through this because this is going to have a wider implication for us. Let's get a little educational moment. Let's learn from Mr. Dumbrill, an expert of his craft.
Now, Steven and the CBC, they managed to keep me in their report, and that's what we'll be examining today. However, to keep me in, even after I made a special effort to avoid giving them anything to pull me out of context on, meant that they could only use 3.5 seconds of a comment I made, taken out of context, which was an auxiliary point provided as a side note for illustration purposes. Now, this is going to be, let me adjust my microphone here, because this is going to be one of the most valuable videos I make, in that what it reveals extends beyond just the specific issues that I usually speak about. I mean, even if you disagree with everything else I've ever said, or reject all of my perspectives, today I'm going to indisputably and unmistakably demonstrate how mainstream media shapes your views and opinions through manipulation, dishonesty, and outright lies. Now, you may already be asking yourself, why would I have participated in this if I knew I'd either be cut completely or just cut out of context? So I went in knowing I'd be disrespected by the CBC. But that disrespect, that misrepresentation, experiencing it directly from the inside, once again, because other media outlets have done this to me before as well, it would become the ultimate example and illustration to prove to you, beyond any reasonable doubt, everything I've been trying to tell you and tell my audience about in regards to mainstream media news all this time. Outlets like the CBC and other ones as well, especially when it comes to topics of China. Now, aware of this, during my interview, I also snuck in all kinds of examples, some of them keeping them external to CBC in many cases, inadvertently telling the journalist interviewing me, Stephen D'Souza, exactly what he would do, what he would turn around and do with my interview. And I also slipped in content that would make it incredibly awkward for Stephen to do what he inevitably ended up doing, while coming out on the other end with examples that I could provide you with to show you how little integrity the CBC has. In a moment, I'll share clips with you showing Stephen looking me directly in the face, hearing what I had to say, and shamelessly proceeding to do exactly what I demonstrated to him and said to him was unethical journalism. From here, it might be a good idea to watch the full segment before continuing if you want to first generate your own opinion on the piece. It's less than 3 minutes long. Just make sure that you pay special attention to how they represented me, what it is you think I was saying, and from what perspective or viewpoint, based on how I was framed and based on the 3.5 second soundbite that they used. I will put the link into the description. Either way, moving on. Before we get into my specific soundbite, I want to pull out one of the most comical, ironic bits from this whole exercise. During my interview, I had explained how ironic it was that news outlets were constantly searching for people influenced by governments or ill-intentioned funding, while continually, uncritically, featuring content from ASPI, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And let me play you a short clip from that portion.
So what's your message then to Canadians who are going to be watching the Olympics and likely see coverage on CBC and other networks talking about the reports of human rights abuses in Xinjiang? What's your message to them? What are the missing pieces that they should know about?
Well, I think before they really engage with a lot of the missing pieces or read the report, for example, that debunked the ASPI Uyghurs for Sale report on forced labor, they need to recognize that the narrative really is unbalanced right now. There isn't an honest conversation going on about this stuff. So, I mean, here we are looking for foreign influencers in China and trying to figure out what's driving them. Yet ASPI is an organization that's funded by the US State Department and arms manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, who said in their Q4 earnings call that the tensions around the Asia region is going to be a profit potential for them in the future. And media outlets are boosting them without holding them accountable for their funding. I mean, the CBC has also used ASPI without disclosing to their audience that they're funded by the US State Department and arms manufacturers. So I think a very, very essential first step before somebody becomes open-minded enough to hear the other side of the story, something that contradicts the mainstream narrative that's been indoctrinated into their minds, is to first recognize and look for what I'm saying, that there has never been an honest conversation on this topic to begin with.
I mean, I guess this is a very sort of imperialist sort of criticism, right, of what's happening, what the U.S. has done in the past when it criticizes China, I guess, right? Is that sort of...
I mean, I don't think it has to be imperialist or anything. I just think it's a bad idea for arms manufacturers who profit from conflict funding think tanks that ramp up aggressions towards China and ramp up the idea that China needs to be confronted. And then their reports that they produce with military industrial complex funding then gets fed into mainstream media outlets uncritically without mentioning that conflict of interest. I mean, I just think that's a basic journalistic kind of integrity thing that needs to be done.
Stephen looked me right in my face. He heard me explain why it's ironic and hypocritical how they engage with and present folks like me while uncritically pushing a military-industrial complex-backed think tank that puts out stories with a clear conflict of interest without these media outlets ever informing their audience. I didn't think Stephen would publish my comments about Aspie. I thought there was no way he would do this. But at the same time, I never, in my wildest imagination, in my wildest dreams, not even going in with my pre-existing low expectations of mainstream media, did I ever imagine that Stephen would finish that call with me and proceed to uncritically push that same military-industrial complex-backed think tank without informing their audience of their problematic funding or conflict of interest. Especially in the context of a report that's actually all about compromised influence campaigns.
These videos paint a rosy picture of a region many Western journalists are blocked from accessing. Fergus Ryan with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute says it's part of a state effort to counter reporting of human rights abuses in Xinjiang.
So now, I have been personally included in one of Aspie's reports before. What we see here is Stephen using the exact think tank that I warned him about to make accusations against folks like me without ever allowing my response or criticisms of Aspie to be in return also heard by their audience. My counter-argument, basically. The Aspie analyst that they put on air got 7 times more airtime than I did. Me, as one of the actual subjects of the report. The one, who they're speculating about. And the audience never got to learn the truth about this organization.
But this is classic, right? Like what he's talking about here, like this is classic behavior, right? Like I remember fairly recently the BBC did a documentary, maybe a couple of years ago now, about the internment camps or whatever, the concentration camps or whatever, where they literally took a film crew into these places and found out that they were vocational schools. Like it's obvious for anyone to see. And one of the things that was so shocking is that in that, this Stevens is just trying to keep his job, man. This is trying to keep his job, exactly. But one of the things that was so shocking to me is that the BBC actually sat down with like the Minister of Propaganda or their equivalent, right, for the Xinjiang province region, like literally the person who's responsible for propaganda in the area, and they sat down and they had a conversation with him, and they ended up using one sentence, right? Whereas they had a conversation with a CIA asset, Selma Remby or something along those lines, and they had like literally a 5-minute conversation with her, which just kind of shows you where they're like, even if they were incentivized to smear this, if you're sitting down with like the actual leaders of a like major organization, like don't you think that deserves a little bit more airtime? Don't you think that the conversation that you're having with those people is probably more important than like this other person off on the side who is of questionable backing? Like, people wonder why the mainstream media is losing credibility, right? And it's basic things like that. If you're sitting down with like the head of an institute, you should probably give them the most amount of say, frankly. But that's not how it's rolling. And so the whole enterprise, like there's a reason why my channel is growing. There's a reason why I'm gaining steam. There's a reason why it's happening this way. And it's because the mainstream media is just incredulous. Like they have no credibility left in them at all, and it's becoming extremely obvious.
Making those accusations, nor did they get to hear the accused's response to those accusations that had been provided to CBC. I mean, how much more blatant can it get? I really like this. I want to include a tweet and an article quote from one of my favorite journalists, and by that I mean real, actual journalists who does real journalism, Caitlin Johnston, who wrote about my experience. And she tweeted, A war machine-funded think tanker appearing on a brazenly propagandistic show on Western state media to explain the dark mechanics of Chinese propaganda is so twisted, it's actually delicious. Caitlin includes a screenshot from her article that reads, "This is made even more ironic by the fact that the CBC segment is dominated by the analysis of a think tanker from the anti-China narrative management firm Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which D'Souza never bothers to inform CBC's audience is extensively funded by governments and the military-industrial complex. Dumbrell had even posted footage of the interview where he's seen telling D'Souza that citing think tanks funded by governments and the arms industry without telling your audience that that's what you're doing is journalistic malpractice, which is plainly true. And they went and did exactly that anyway." Now, let's move on to perhaps their biggest offense from here. Their desperate attempt to find something they could pull out of context from a near half-hour interview with me, ending up with only 3.5 seconds of usable footage to twist into their narrative. If you've already seen the CBC final piece, you know that they wrapped me up into a conversation about state-sponsored influencers without ever distinguishing me from the rest of this group classification, and without ever publishing my response to these allegations. Is it because I refused to answer? Maybe they forgot to ask me. Neither. Let's take a look. I'll share a clip. There's two different parts stuck together, so you can see I mentioned it multiple times, where I specifically address this.
There's a report in the U.S. showing that China is paying a company to, hire influencers to do this, which is within the rights of countries to promote their image. But there is criticism saying that, this is being done to, I guess, I don't know what the right word is, maybe paper over, but like smooth out some of the criticisms and provide propaganda in a sense. And what do you say to that? I mean, because some might say that even you yourself are participating in that.
Well, I'm not participating in any sort of a campaign. I don't benefit financially from anything I do. As a matter of fact, I go through great expense, both time-wise and financially, to do what I do. I'm not belonging to any sort of a state apparatus here, and I can travel around freely and see everything for myself as well. When I went to Xinjiang, it was completely by myself. I booked it by myself. I booked the hotels by myself. I mean, anybody can do this. So I don't think that there's really a difficulty to find the missing pieces of information that I've been putting out there.
Now, after seeing that, let's all remind ourselves what kind of a report I got framed into.
They were invited on trips organized and often paid for by the Communist Party. State-owned media then amplify the videos across various platforms, not disclosing the government's role. While most China-based influencers declined CBC's interview requests, we did connect with Canadian Daniel Dumbrell. He's lived in China for more than a decade. With 165,000 subscribers on YouTube, his videos defending Chinese policy in Xinjiang are popular and often amplified by state media.
If anywhere else in the world was doing the same thing, it would be called a marketing campaign.
That 3.5 seconds at the end was all I got. It came after the CBC was talking about organized trips paid by the Communist Party, and they included footage of my Xinjiang visit, which I told them was a personal effort paid for by myself. Even if he didn't believe me, how dishonest is it that he didn't even allow my response to be heard? He simply wrapped me up into this category of suspects without publishing my response. What's worse is they chose a 3.5 second clip, which makes it seem as though I'm not even disputing those claims, and are in fact simply making excuses for being involved in such a campaign. Stephen D'Souza knew exactly what he did. I mean, this was absolutely unethical, dishonest, and even fraudulent behavior. I wanted to give Stephen a chance to respond. I sent an email to him and asked him two simple questions, one of which was, do you feel my views and opinions and nature of my content was fairly represented in the final piece? I wanted to hear it from his own mouth, that he looks at this final report and he stands by it, doesn't see a problem with it, feels it accurately presented my position and my response, and he doesn't find it absolutely abhorrent. Stephen refused to respond to either of the questions, simply stating that he was under time constraints, and that I could basically tell my own audience if I had a problem with it. This is presumably his excuse as to why he's comfortable maliciously taking his guests out of context. If you don't have enough time, just take them out of context. finishing off with basically deal with it. He literally doesn't care, and he knows exactly what he's doing. He also knows that the damage is done, and for the most part, his audience won't get to see the truth. It would have been nice to actually leave a comment under his report on YouTube to let his audience know about the truth and what my response actually was, but these comments the comments section is turned off. Now, according to the CBC, comments have been turned off to avoid abusive comments, while apparently the CBC is free to abuse their guests however they want by maliciously taking them out of context. Maybe that's what CBC's comment blocking is actually really all about. I don't believe the CBC really thinks their reporters are snowflakes who can't take a bit of negative feedback. I think they've just gotten so used to including outright lies in their report that they probably couldn't keep up with the number of people looking to set the record straight. So, Stephen, I'm going to ask you one more time, publicly, just so you can set the record straight. Tell us, after reflecting on our conversation and watching your final product, do you stand by that work, both in a personal and professional capacity? It will be useful to see if you dare say that you stand by this kind of reporting. And I don't suspect you could admit that you're ashamed of this piece without risking your paycheck. Therefore, I think your silence, which I think inevitably you're going to go with, will at least give us enough hope that at bare minimum, you're self-aware enough to recognize that you are a sellout and everything that you are pretending to look for in this report. Now, back to my audience. I think it's worthwhile to let you see for yourself where the 3.5 second, if anywhere else in the world were doing the same thing, it'd be called a marketing campaign, comment came from. A small portion of it will be, what I show you right now will be a very slight repeat of what I've already shown you earlier, but it's important to illustrate the full context. You'll hear the soundbite that the CBC extracted right at the end.
The crux of our story is that China is using social media to sort of bolster its image ahead of the Olympic Games. There is criticism saying that, this is being done to smooth out some of the criticisms and provide propaganda in a sense. What do you say to that? I mean, because some might say that even you yourself are participating in that.
Well, I'm not participating in any sort of a campaign. I don't benefit financially from anything I do. As a matter of fact, I go through great expense, both time-wise and financially, to do what I do. I think that Beijing promoting their city seems like a fairly ordinary thing that cities do all over the world in the context of having human rights abuses. I don't think, I wouldn't at least expect somebody who's being paid by the Tourism Board of San Diego to ask them, say, why would you be doing this when the U.S. just drone striked a family of 10 people, including 7 children, that were running to their father? And the guy who warned us that most of these drone strike programs kill civilians is in jail, Daniel Hale, or talking about Julian Assange. I mean, Canada has its own influence program that was revealed a few days ago, which is the Halifax shipbuilding project, which is billions of dollars over budget. So Ottawa is paying influencers and giving them specific talking points as well. It's the same thing. I wouldn't ask those people that are participating in that saying, well, how do you feel about doing this when, the graves of Native children are still being uncovered? The Truth and Reconciliation recommendations still haven't been fully implemented, and people are living on reserves without clean drinking water. Maybe people should do that, but the fact that this is happening in an unbalanced way and saying, well, why can Beijing promote their city when we think there's human rights abuses going on? I think we need to step back and say, okay, well, is this really the standard? Should we all be doing this going forward?
I mean, does that assume then that there are bad things happening in China as well?
Well, I think so. So first of all, I think it's important to know I have serious issues with the allegations and the veracity of the allegations being made against China, specifically in the Xinjiang region. But I can just take a step back from that and say, even if you think there are things going on, I mean, we're not giving the same equivalence to other countries like the U.S. when they have, whatever it is, police brutality or high incarceration rates or kids in cages on the border. I mean, we don't have the conversation in the same way. And actually, even when we start approaching this topic of Beijing running these influence campaigns, they're influence campaigns. If anywhere else in the world was doing the same thing, it would be called a marketing campaign.
So as you can see, the 3.5 second portion at the end was far from the core point. It was rather an additional supplementary supporting comment for illustration purposes. But far more problematic than that is when you isolate and play only that 3.5 second portion without the context of me clearly stating that I'm not a part of such a campaign, which I had just said moments earlier, all while you slip me into a report, grouping me with your suspects. Suddenly that clip is what becomes my only defense. As far as the CBC audience is concerned, I never denied the involvement, and I'm simply providing an excuse for my participation. Even if they thought I was lying, it would be wrong to still deliberately cut my defense out. And if you did think I was lying, the portion where I said I have issues with the allegations towards China becomes even more important context.
And all of this is just Daniel going through and really affirming something that we know all along. Like, there's a reason why trust in the media is as low as it is. There's a reason why things are collapsing. There's a reason, right? It's and it's becoming even more obvious by the day. You have commentators like Daniel Dumbrill coming out and just like attempting to have a conversation in good faith, and it just gets torn apart and thrown into this machine. Okay, guys, I am going to call it early today. I cannot believe how tired I actually am. Like, unbelievably tired. I know I'm calling it an hour earlier, but that's Friday for you. Always remember, guys, each and every one of you is a quantum being walking around in quantum energy. These billionaires are spending hundreds of billions of dollars to try to convince you that all you are is a commodity. Revolt, rebel, repent. Good luck. We're going to need it.